Welcome to the Sex Science Podcast, where we turn the latest peer-reviewed research on intimacy and sexuality into fun, accessible conversations. Generated by AI and fact-checked by experts, the Sex Science Podcast was created by LaShaw to empower you through knowledge. So, join us as we explore pleasure, relationships, human connection, and everything in between.
Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're taking a deep dive into something I think you'll find quite fascinating. We're going to be talking about the experiences of thin people who are partnered with fat people.
Interesting topic.
It is, and specifically, we're going to be unpacking this study. The title is a mouthful. It's called, They Might Be Wondering Why I Didn't Set My Sights Higher. Associative Stigma in Sexual and Romantic Relationships with Fat Partners, published in the Journal of Sex Research.
Okay, so right away, that title kind of hints at what we're going to be looking at.
It does, right?
Like there's some judgment going on.
Exactly, and that's exactly what the study delves into, what's called associative stigma, which is the judgment that someone faces, not because of anything they themselves are doing or any trait they possess, but simply because of who they're associated with.
So you're judged based on your partner's attributes?
Exactly, yeah. In this case, it's thin individuals who are in relationships with fat partners.
Okay, so how did they go about studying this?
Well, this study kind of took a two-pronged approach. First, they interviewed thin partners of fat people to get a real-world perspective.
Like lived experience.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then they also did this interesting thing where they used fictional scenarios to kind of gauge public perception of mixed-weight couples.
Oh, clever. I'm interested to see what they found.
Yeah, me too. So let's start with those real-life experiences, right?
Mm-hmm.
What did they actually learn from talking to these thin partners?
Well, they used what's called a mixed methods approach, which is super cool because it means they gathered both stories, qualitative data, and hard numbers quantitative data.
Okay, so what did they find? What were the big takeaways?
Well, one of the most striking findings was that nearly half of the participants reported experiencing at least one form of associative stigma.
Wow, so it's really prevalent.
Yeah. And the most common forms were assumptions about the fat partner's inferiority or just weight-based microaggressions that were directed at the couple.
Ugh, I can only imagine how hurtful that would be.
Yeah, and things like negative attention from others, getting stares, and judgmental looks.
Oh, I hate that.
Yeah, it's not a nice feeling.
But I guess on the positive side, it's not everyone. It's less than half.
True, it's not everyone. And despite all of that, despite those challenges, one of the things that they found was that relationship and sexual satisfaction were high on average.
Really? That's heartening to hear.
It is, and it was true even when they factored in varying levels of perceived stigma.
So even couples who felt that stigma very acutely were still reporting happy relationships.
Exactly, yeah. They were finding happiness and fulfillment despite facing these external pressures.
That's pretty amazing. It speaks to the strength of those relationships, I guess.
It does. It really does.
Okay, so that's the first part. What about the second part of the study where they were looking at public perception? What did they do there?
Right. So they presented these fictional vignettes of couples to a separate group of participants.
Okay.
And they varied different factors like the partner's genders, their sexual orientations, just to mix it up.
To make sure they weren't getting skewed results based on one particular type of couple.
Exactly. And then the key thing they were looking at was some vignettes featured mixed-weight couples and others featured same-weight couples.
Okay, so they were really trying to isolate how do weight differences alone impact people's perceptions.
Exactly.
Got it. So what did they observe? What did they see?
This is interesting. They found that there was no significant difference in reported closeness or liking between mixed-weight and same-weight couples.
Oh, so no outright dislike. Like people weren't saying, oh, I don't like this couple because they're different weights.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, but
there's always a but.
They did find that the thin partners in the mixed-weight couples were consistently perceived as less competent.
So no, like overt negativity toward the relationship itself, but there's still an underlying bias toward the thin partner.
Yeah, exactly. Some judgment going on.
Interesting. What else?
They also found that participants reported more negative emotions, like pity, dislike, even anger towards thin partners in mixed-weight couples.
Wow, anger. That's pretty intense.
Yeah, and also there was a greater desire to help those thin partners.
Wow, so even when there's no direct negativity towards the couple, the thin partner is still subject to judgment.
It's true. And there was one more interesting finding, kind of unexpected, really.
Okay, lay it on me.
Despite those negative perceptions we just talked about, thin partners in mixed weight couples were actually also rated as warmer than those in same weight couples.
Warmer? Really? But why? That doesn't make sense.
I know, it's surprising, right? It's complex, but it might suggest that people view the thin partner as somehow more compassionate or selfless for choosing to be with a fat partner.
Oh, so they get bonus points for dating someone who doesn't fit the conventional beauty standards.
Maybe, yeah. Like they're receiving kudos for their perceived generosity or open-mindedness.
That's a fascinating observation. Even seemingly positive perceptions can still be rooted in societal biases.
Yeah, exactly. These findings really just highlight how complex and often subtle the ways in which fat stigma operates within relationships are.
It's a lot to unpack, for sure.
It is, yeah. It really underscores how deep this fat phobia runs in our culture.
Right.
That it influences how we perceive not just fat individuals themselves, but also people they're connected to.
Feels like we're just scratching the surface.
We are. This study is a great start, but we need more research. We need to understand more about the long-term implications. And we need to look more at how relationship types might influence the experience of stigma. Is there a difference in how people perceive casual sexual relationship versus a committed long-term partnership?
That's a good point, yeah. You would think, I guess, that there would be less judgment in a casual relationship. But
right. But maybe not.
Yeah, maybe not.
And how does the stigma faced by a thin woman with a fat male partner compare to that of a thin man with a fat female partner?
Right.
Now, what about same-sex couples? How does all of this play out?
So many questions.
I know, right? And this brings us to a really, really important point. Unlike many other forms of stigma, individuals facing judgment because of who they're with actually have a way to reduce or escape that stigma.
You mean by breaking up?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Kind of a heavy thought, right?
It is.
So I'm curious, what stands out to you most from everything we've talked about so far?
That's a good question. I think for me, it's that contrast between the high relationship satisfaction that they found in the first study and then all that negativity that came out in the second study. It's like, even if you're happy as a couple, you're still dealing with a world that maybe doesn't totally accept you.
It's true. And I think it challenges all of us to think about, okay, what can we do to create a world that's more just and more accepting of fat people?
Totally. And ultimately, that's what this whole deep dive is about, right? We can understand this associative stigma, how it works, the impact it has. Then we can start to build a society where everyone feels valued and respected, no matter their size or, the size of their partner.
That's a great goal.
Yeah.
And a great takeaway from this deep dive.
Yeah, it makes you think, where do we even begin?
Right. Individual attitudes or systemic change, where do we put our energy?
Such a big question.
It is, yeah. And a tough one. No easy answers.
Definitely not. But awareness is a good first step. And that's what we try to do with these deep dives, right? Shed light on stuff that maybe people haven't really thought about much.
Exactly. And give you the knowledge to navigate this stuff in your own life.
Right.
Because whether you're dealing with associative stigma yourself or you just want to be a better ally to fat people, understanding this is really important.
Couldn't agree more. Well, on that note, I think we've done a pretty good job unpacking this study.
Yeah, I think so.
So we're going to wrap up this deep dive here. Hope you found it interesting and thought-provoking, as always. And we'll catch you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Sex Science Podcast brought to you by LaShaw. We hope that you learned something new about the wonderful world of human intimacy and sexuality. And join us next time as we dive into more fascinating research. And remember, science is for you. Music for this podcast was produced by SOUNDRAW.